Hey there, Mama, and welcome back to the Moms Overcoming Overwhelm podcast, episode number 225. I'm Emily McDermott, and I am here beside you on this journey as we work together to declutter your home, head, and heart. I am very honored and excited to be chatting with Katy Joy Wells. She is the host of the Maximize Minimalist podcast. She's also the author of the new book, Making Home Your Happy Place, a real-life guide to decluttering without the overwhelm. And it comes out February 17th, 2026. So we are chatting in this episode all about how a car accident in 2017 rocked her and her family's entire world, and she realized how she was using clutter as a shield. We also discuss her holistic decluttering method, including root awareness, the 4 types of clutter, and designing our homes for follow through to help our family members. And also we dive deep into identity clutter, arguably the hardest type of clutter for moms, and how we can find freedom by letting go. I want to mention that there is a giveaway going on. So Katy has graciously offered to give away a signed copy of her book. And in addition, next week's guest, Joshua Becker, is going to be giving away a signed copy of his new book, Uncluttered Faith. So if you are interested in being entered in the giveaway for either one of these books, everything is in the show notes. You would be leaving a review in Apple Podcasts for the show if you haven't already, or a rating, comment in Spotify, or sharing it with a friend over text or social media, and then emailing a screenshot of it to me at info@simple.me.com before Monday, February 9th. Everything is in the show notes, but I'm really excited that these 2 amazing books are coming out. You really are in for a treat with these chats, starting, of course, with this discussion with Katy Joy Wells. So without further ado, grab the notebook and pen, and let's go ahead and jump into this chat with Katy. Hey Mama, are you tired of your cluttered home and mile-long to-do lists but are too overwhelmed to know where to start? Do you lack the time and motivation and don't think you'll ever conquer the clutter? You're in the right place. I'm Emily, wife, boy mom, and declutter coach who has overcome the overwhelm in my own life through decluttering and simplifying. I believe every mom deserves the peace that comes from a clutter-free home. Ready to get your life back? Let's declutter your home, head, and heart together. Hi, Katy. Thank you so much for coming on the Moms Overcoming Overwhelm podcast. I am thrilled to talk to you in real life. I've only kind of messaged on Instagram, so this is so fun.
Oh, I'm so excited to hang out with you and your listeners today. I've been just thrilled to get you on my schedule and talk all things simplification, decluttering, and super excited to be here.
Yeah, and I've been listening to the podcast for a while. I was trying to remember how long. I feel like it was 2019. Please tell me you started.
Yeah. Because I was like, oh, Emily McDermott, I know her, but it feels like when you talk to people on Instagram throughout the years, it's like, oh, but then I'm like, well, I guess I've never met her in person.
That's how these weird online business relationships work. But I have just been following your journey. And when you announced that you were writing a book, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I have to get her on the schedule. And to have the name, well, first of all, Making Home Your Happy Place. Love that. But then the kind of other part, which of course, Moms Overcoming Overwhelm, a real life guide to decluttering without the overwhelm. Well, obviously we have to talk today. But for those of you that don't know you or your podcast, perhaps, could you just introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family, how you serve women, and maybe one thing you like to do for fun?
Yeah, so I'm Katy and I'm born and raised in the Midwest. So shout out to all my Midwest peeps. I'm from Iowa. And but for the last almost 15 years, my family and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. So right in the Appalachian Mountains, not too far from where you are. I'm married to Andrew and we have 2 sons who are 9 and 10. And I help families reclaim their homes and make their homes their happy place, hence the book title, right? And that's really through the years, the biggest frustration I hear is that people are so overwhelmed by clutter and it keeps coming back no matter what they try. And with most decluttering advice out there, and you know this too, Emily, it's like chopping weeds at the surface. It'll look good for a day or 2, maybe a week at most, but then it, so to speak, it comes back and the weeds grow back. So I help people pull the weeds out and, nourish the soil so the weeds don't come back up. And that happens through the relationship with stuff, and really getting to the heart and soul behind why we have clutter to begin with. And it's through those means that I found has really offered my families the biggest breakthroughs when it comes to how they view stuff, the stress, the overwhelm, and creating that more peaceful, easy to manage home, which I think we all crave at the end of the day. And to answer what I do for fun, this didn't used to sound fun to me, which is funny, but I love lifting weights. I really love just like the act of lifting weights and that type of exercise. And I also am that mom who walks around my neighborhood with a weighted vest. I've been doing that for years and I have so much fun. I just enjoy being outside, walking, and just moving my body. It's so good for my mental health.
Yeah, I have been lifting weights for a while. I have a set in the basement, and I always think like if we were to move, that probably would be something I would move.
Yes.
But I love that, and I've been like a chronic perfectionist and everything, and so avoiding failure. But then when it comes to lifting weights, you're trying something that might be heavier that you're not sure whether you can do it. And muscle failure is actually something
Yes.
that is like a positive thing. So I
Yes.
think it's been really good for my mental health, not only the endorphins, but just like being able to go outside the comfort zone and be like, oh, I can do this, you know?
I
So
love that
yeah,
perspective.
so I
Absolutely.
have absolutely loved that. And the whole, bone density stuff and all the other
Oh,
things
girl.
we're supposed to be
I,
paying attention to right now.
so I'm 37, but AI, the algorithm knows like I'm really interested in like perimenopausal,
Yeah.
all these, so I tell like I'm wearing makeup for like 40 plus. I wear like everything. I'm like 5 years ahead. I'm like, I got to be proactive, Katie. Like just do the weight vest, take the, take the omegas. Like, come on, trying to get ahead of this. No, it's great. I
Uh,
love it.
oh, awesome. Well, I knew a little bit about your story and kind of how you got into it because I find for most people, we may have had some clues in childhood, like I was pretty organized and had a, neat room and, childhood, but usually there's sort of this factor that kind of is like, oh, this is how I sort of got into it. And for me, it was infertility. For you, it
Yes.
was this car accident that happened in 2017 that affected your whole family. And when you tell about it in the book, what I find is interesting is coming home and it's like you're wanting to be home where you can actually relax and rest because you've been in the hospital forever. And then it's like, no, I can't because there's stuff everywhere. But you're describing it not so much as just like stuff that we have to get rid of or stuff that's in the way, but actually that it had was acting as a shield. And I found that super fascinating because honestly, I've never thought of clutter as a shield before. And I would love it if you could just talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that, kind of what you're experiencing and how you recognized that clutter was actually a shield that was keeping you from some of these like thoughts and feelings you needed to work through.
Yeah. So after our car accident, like you said, I spent hours, like most of the day at the hospital. For many of those hours, I didn't know if my husband was going to survive. Right. So highly traumatic. And finally, at the end of a really long day, the doctors come to me. He's going to be able to make a full recovery, but he's got broken neck, multiple fractures in his neck, all these things. They give me like a rap sheet of all the things he'd have to overcome. And they said, go home. He's sleeping, go home. So at the end of that day, I craved so deeply. It was like my whole body I just needed someone. And people were telling me it's going to be okay, but like I needed to hear that like in an environment, like my home environment, right? I just so deeply craved comfort after such a whirlwind of a day. And when I walk through my front door, I feel like I kind of saw my home in a different light. And the clutter had been there. It didn't change from when I left it this morning to when I came home, but I kind of saw it differently. And I was so immediately overwhelmed, more so than usual. Every surface was covered, toys everywhere, dirty dishes everywhere, paper, like all the things, crayons, everything. And it hit me just like a tidal wave. And in that moment, I couldn't ignore it as much as I had in the past because I saw what was at stake. I needed to be there for my kids, for my husband to heal. And clutter very deeply in that moment, I was like, this is driving a wedge between how I need to show up for my people, and that's not okay. It was stealing time, energy, bandwidth. And I think that's usually how clutter is framed. And I think a lot of us recognize that when we walk into our own homes or see the pile and mess. We're like, oh yeah, it stresses me out. I understand how it takes more time to clean up. Like, right, those tend to be more apparent and discussed. And then that night, I was just in bed, tossing and turning, and I couldn't shut my brain off, even though I was so utterly exhausted. And one thought that kept looping in my head was like, I can't keep living like this. I can't do it anymore. I've said that many times, but I really mean it this time. And then something really unexpected clicked in that moment. And that was, I realized that if I do handle this clutter, if I could wave a magic wand and the clutter would disappear, then I would no longer be distracted from a lot of the pain in my life. Right. And obviously, I had emotional pain from that day, but I had a lot of other things going on, chronic depression, chronic anxiety. If I didn't have to sit with clutter and be distracted by all the time, I'd have to sit with those feelings. If I didn't constantly have to reorganize and pick up and spend 30 minutes a day picking up toys and resentfully like tossing them back in the toy bin, I wouldn't have to face the fact that like I was resentful towards my husband or my kids or just unhappy in life. And I think a lot of us feel this too as moms, like we have to kind of quietly abandon these other parts of us or identities we used to have pre-mom. And a lot of that's natural and organic, but sometimes it's like, it's also sad. There's grief. And I wasn't dealing with so much of that. And it became very apparent that clutter wasn't just filling my home, it was shielding me from those things I didn't really want to sit with, because clutter keeps us distracted and busy from the longings, the losses, and like all these things sometimes we don't know how to name. And that accident forced me to stop and see what clutter was costing me and also what it was protecting me from facing. And once I saw that, I couldn't really unsee it. And that's when kind of the real work began.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I definitely have used, I think, other methods for shielding. Not so much
Yes, we
clutter, but
all do.
like, yeah, like anything to distract and to feel sometimes like, especially in the early years of motherhood, and our kids are pretty much the same age, mine are 7 and 9, but when I was kind of dealing with postpartum anxiety and everything, it was like, okay, well, as long as I can stay busy and just kind of like go through the motions and do the things and then occasionally scroll on my phone because that makes me feel better,
Yep.
then I could be distracted from the fact, like you said, that I was just like really unhappy. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And then from this kind of developed, I know over time, but your holistic decluttering method, which
Mm-hmm.
I am someone that hates yard work. And my husband and I are not, well, I read Fair Play and now we're a little bit
Mm-hmm.
clearer on who's doing what, but he was like supposed to be like in charge of like the weeds, but then sometimes the weeds are there and I'm like, oh, I hate pulling weeds because we usually have the ones that like are just on the surface and then you are
Mm-hmm.
trying to get to the root, but like you can't because it's just like between
It's tricky.
bricks or something. So I love this idea of pulling it up at the root.
Yeah.
And I would love it because your holistic decluttering process kind of or method starts with like the root awareness.
Yeah.
And you talk about this stuff story, which again, I kind of understand that just being in this realm for a while, but
Mm-hmm.
I just love how you describe like the importance of before you're going to approach a room, before you're going to
Mm-hmm.
be decluttering for the umpteenth time and then wondering why things keep getting cluttered again, why it's so important to take a moment and to
Mm-hmm.
actually ask yourself some of these questions around your stuff story. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, most decluttering advice out there, and this was me because before this car accident, like even like probably right when my first son was born, I was like, oh my gosh, this kid has a lot of stuff. Like we're gonna need a bigger house. That was my thing. Like I remember coming home from the baby shower with all my first son stuff. He wasn't even born yet, and I was like, if we have a second kid, we're gonna need a bigger house. I told Andrew, and looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is how so many of us think. We think it's a space problem, right? But anyway, like most decluttering advice out there, and one big reason I continue to fail and so many people get overwhelmed and feel like they fail with decluttering is because clutter is treated like a symptom. The advice out there just focuses on the symptoms and not the root cause, right? And it's about buy this, organize this, here's a storage solution. Those things are all helpful, but it's not a one-stop shop, right? Same with decluttering. Decluttering is so important. It's part of the process. I still declutter regularly, but the analogy I typically use is like imagine you're in a lake nearby in your beautiful state. You're in Virginia, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you're on a lake nearby. You're like, oh, I'm just gonna like go out, relax, paddle on the lake, and just enjoy myself. And mid canoe ride, you notice that your feet are getting wet, and you look down. There's a hole in the canoe. You're like, oh my gosh, I need to start bailing the water out. So water's filling in. You scramble to bail the water out with your hands. You're working so hard, you're exhausting yourself. but the water keeps coming back in. This is what we're doing with so many conventional declutter methods, right? The leaks are still there in the canoe. No wonder we're burned out and exhausted by all these methods. It's just making the problem harder to solve. So this is why I developed understanding your stuff story through my own personal means, and then teaching it. And your stuff story is so important. It is the emotional, historical, and cultural reasons behind why we have our relationship that we do with our stuff, not just our clutter, but our stuff. And once we understand that stuff story and start there, we can begin to find the leak, right? Close up the leak. And the decluttering is actually going to stick a heck of a lot easier. So, like I said, it's made up of those three. Do you want me to cover those really quickly?
Yeah.
The three kind of, okay.
Definitely.
So historical, this was a big one for so many of us. This is really part of our stuff story that we inherited. This is how we were raised. Our parents, our grandparents, how like stuff was modeled to us by our caregivers, people we spent time with. This can be how they accumulated scarcity. It can be abundance. Did they never get rid of things? Was their family motto waste not, want not? You know, these things leave a deep ingrained impact on how we view things and how we're wired, right? Cultural is another big one. And you know this, the messaging we absorb from culture, fear of missing out, keeping up with the Joneses, more is better, all those things is going to influence, of course, what we buy, but also what we keep. And then you have your own personal experiences. Like these are the seasons that shape you, becoming a mom, maybe moving across the country, maybe having, financial loss and really worrying like, how am I going to pay the credit card bill this month? These experiences also create patterns to how we relate to our things. Can I share a quick story?
Please.
So I worked with a woman once who came to me, like a lot of people. She's like, I have all the checklists. I have the online courses. I listen to every single podcast, but I can't like figure out why I struggle to let go. She really struggled with scarcity clutter, which I know we'll talk about the types of clutter later. So she had duplicates of everything. And she was just so worried, like, if I get rid of this, what if I need it? Or her kind of motto was, well, this is valuable. I spent money on this and this is useful. So once we just really briefly dug into her stuff story, she shared that she grew up with very little. Her family struggled financially, and there was like true scarcity. And so these are the messages she absorbed. And just like as she grew into an adult, she didn't let go of anything because that's what she did, right? And it wasn't like a conscious thought. It was just ingrained into her. Even though she had savings, she had a really successful job, she wasn't, financially insecure. Her actions were saying otherwise. And she was still operating as if she were that little 5-year-old girl hearing her parents talk about this stuff. And all these things she was holding on to just in case is because her nervous system was stuck in that old story, right? And once she saw that pattern, she could begin to address it. So what's important to understand about stuff story, it's not, I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. My parents wrecked me. Or like, not about pointing blame as much as sometimes we want to on our parents, our past or experiences. It's just about bringing that awareness to it, to how we ended up wired the way we are. And then we can acknowledge that some of those beliefs and patterns aren't serving us anymore. They served us, right? Our brains are wired for survival. And that is part of what this is. Your brain's trying to protect you. It doesn't feel safe to let go when that's how you're wired. And once we identify those stories and patterns, we can start to really pick up a pen, flip the page, and start a new one. And that to me is like so much more helpful than any checklist out there,
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how it addresses not only, like you said, like the clutter and the things that we own, but also what we've been conditioned when it comes to buying. Perhaps like you would always go shopping with, well, this was actually Julia Ubengay who, I talked to. She's like, I always went shopping with my grandma. That was like
Yes.
how we connected. That was how
Yep.
we were showing love. And so if you have sort of that background and you find yourself always wanting to take your kids shopping as like a reflection of that, that's another, hole in the canoe.
Yes.
And I know that you definitely focus on both sides, but a lot of times the focus on decluttering is so much like, oh, okay, what I own, and then not so much with like, the stuff coming in, which I know you also address in the book. But I think that also, I was thinking about parenting. we can look back at the ways that we were parented and be able to say, oh, okay, so that's kind of why I might be reacting in this way to my own kids, because this was, for me, it was A's get the praise. And like, as long as I paid, like follow the rules and everything, then things are all good. So when my kids don't listen to me and don't follow the rules, I have, a really tough time with it. And it was just the awareness of, I wonder why that is, not
Yes.
pointing fingers or like
Yeah.
blaming, but then being able to actually acknowledge it and address it, and then be able to kind of like
Yeah.
reframe it so that you can move forward in a different direction. So I think that if people are like, well, I don't know if I have a stuff story, you do. It's just one of the pieces of you, just like parenting or how you would address your job or any of these other things.
Yeah. And it starts with curiosity, right? And I think it can't be the blame piece or the shame piece. When we look at it like, man, I'm just so sentimental. I hate that about myself. Or man, I just like, why is this so hard on me? I stink at this. When we, say these things to ourselves, it keeps us stuck in shame. And when we're stuck in shame, there is no belief for hope. We just say, forget it. And this was me so many times years ago. Forget it. I guess I'll just have a simpler home when the kids grow up and move out of the house. Or like, I'd name all the reasons why decluttering doesn't work for me. I work full time. The women out there, they must have a nanny, like all these different things, And then you're like, well, I don't have to do anything. But really, just bringing in some of that curiosity. I love the parenting piece there because that's so big. Why am I triggered when my kid talks to me this way? Why do I really get heated? Okay, well, let's do a little reflection. And you don't need years worth of, therapy. I don't
Yeah.
think just a few minutes of reflection, journaling, just, and we do that in quiet in those moments, maybe in bed at night instead of scrolling, just think, okay, there's so many opportunities to do that. But I just want to say, make sure it's non-judgmental,
Yeah.
like do it in a very compassionate way, like you would to a friend.
Right. And actually, I think that lends itself well to talking about the types of clutter, because
Yeah.
if we're uncovering our stuff story, we may be uncovering some things. For example, I know a lot of my clients, they don't want to feel wasteful. And because
Mm-hmm.
that is a value of theirs, that maybe they're
Yes.
frugal or they don't want to be wasteful, then they don't want to put things, they're like, well, it's better in my house than in the landfill. And
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the story they're telling themselves. And that might be a combination, because one of the things you say with these four types of clutter, which I want you to get into, is that things can be a combination of these
Yes.
types. It's not that it's just like one type. So
Yeah.
an item might have sentimental value, but then
Mm-hmm.
also you have the scarcity mentality of sort of like, I don't want to let it go because I'm
Mm-hmm.
afraid of such and such. So if you could go through the four types, and then I do want to focus primarily on identity. And the reason is
Yeah.
that, as you mentioned before, as moms, pre-kids, we have an identity. In the different seasons of motherhood, we have different identities. And I find that's one of the harder types for moms to let
Oh,
go
yeah.
of specifically. So if you could go through
Yeah.
each four kind of briefly, and then maybe we can chat about identity for a bit.
Yeah. So the four main types of clutter are, I kind of look at clutter like an onion, right? So when you're peeling an onion, we all know the outer layer just kind of crumbles with very little effort. It's also the thinnest, the smallest. So I call that superficial. And this is like the low hanging fruit, the broken, the obvious excess. There is no like, oh, I might need that one day. There is no emotional attachment. It's less like I need a strategy, but more just like investing a little time into letting that go. Most people, when they start decluttering, start here, and I teach that, and we should, because it's the low hanging fruit. It's the easiest to let go of, right? And then they make progress, they feel better, but then they stop, right? So we need to go deeper. So the next level in, we're talking about scarcity, just in case this could be useful. What if I need this one day? These are, I mean, account for so much of the clutter in many people's homes. Then the next layer is, of course, sentimental clutter. So this is, a lot of us can relate to this. It's the nostalgia, it's the memory, things like that, keepsakes, heirlooms. And then throughout my means of kind of coming up with the four clutter types, this one was probably the hardest for me to identify and verbalize and come up with solutions for, because it's truly like the heart of it, right? It is like where the root starts, like 12 feet under that soil, girl. I'm like, okay, dang, we gotta like do some emotional like archaeology here. And that's the identity clutter you mentioned. And it can be the trickiest because it's tied to who we were, who we maybe are right now, who we want to be, who others think we should be, and that's really loaded for a lot of us. And a lot of us hold on to things that represent these different versions of ourselves, past, present, aspirational, future. And every time we see them, they can remind us that we're falling short, that we're not doing that anymore, that we've changed, maybe that we failed. A couple things for me was camping gear. My husband and I were like really into backpacking before kids. And you know how it goes. Like, you're not probably, I mean, maybe I know one or two people out of like 8 billion who would still do that with like a young child. I am not that adventurous. But right. So every time I'd go into my garage, I'd see these boxes and like, oh man, I remember being like fun and I could just like take a trip. And I was so much happier and bubbly then. And like, right. It's like the meaning we're assigning this stuff, and it can feel heavy after a while, and they can feel impossible to let go of, because to let go of it can feel like the death of a dream. Or maybe I'll never go, if I donate this, I'm never going to go camping again, right? I'm never going to tap back into that piece of me. Or if I don't do this, then that means this. And this is all happening, in microseconds, happening in between our ears and our brains. Another one for me was my running shoes. I bought shoes to run a marathon. I got like the running bug really briefly, which has never come back. I'll be honest. This is many years ago, pre-kids. I like ran a 7-mile race, and I was like, oh, this is the moment. Like, what happens next? You run a 7-mile, then you're like, I want a half marathon. You set your next goal, right? And so I bought these running shoes, and then I had River, my oldest. And then a year and a half later, I had Levi, and they sat in my little walk-in closet. Every morning I'd go to pick out my shoes and I'd see them, and they reminded me like, you're lazy. You should be running. You're never going to run a marathon, right? Some of our stuff in that sense can really bully us. Not always, but sometimes. And I was like, well, I don't want to get rid of them, because again, that means I'm never going to run the marathon. This is the story I was telling myself. And then I realized sometimes we're not honoring who we were or hope to be by keeping these things and keeping these old stories. We're just punishing who we are now. I was tired of feeling like garbage every time I saw those shoes. Sometimes, I would say more often than not, the solution and the most powerful thing we can do is to let go of that story and let go of that thing. It's no longer serving me. But simplifying doesn't always mean decluttering or putting those shoes in your donation bin. So for me, I thought, I just need to change the story I've attached to these shoes. I called them marathon shoes. I'm not running a marathon. That is not the season I'm in now. So instead of them continuing to remind me of, you're probably never running a marathon, and that is actually true, I was like, I can use these for walks. I can use these for hikes. Truly, they are running shoes, but who cares, right? And once they stopped becoming marathon shoes and they became like my mom everyday shoes, same shoes, different story, it felt like freedom to me. And they weren't clutter because I was using them, right? So for all the moms listening and women listening, if you're wondering where identity clutter is hiding, I mean, ask yourself, like, what am I keeping that represents who I used to be, who I think I should be, rather than who I am right now? Am I holding on to this out of love for who I was, or aspiration for who I want to be, or guilt for falling short, right? It doesn't feel good. And if it's guilt, we have two choices. We can let it go, let the physical item go, or like I did in that case, I rewrote the story and then began to use a thing. And both paths are valid, and both paths lead to freedom.
Yeah, that resonates so much with me because I've dealt with it a lot in my own life, and to just be able to recognize it. I just spoke to a mom's group recently and talked about these stress relieving adult coloring books that I got.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when I was between kiddos. I think I was after Sean was born, and I was like, okay, I'm obviously anxious. So I'm gonna get this very like soothing, stress relieving. Well, it was stressing me out because I would look at it and not feel
Mm,
like doing it or want to do it. But I felt
yeah.
like I should, air
Should.
quotes, do
Yeah.
it because this is supposed to relieve my stress. So that was one example of something where I, let go. But one of the other examples that you give that I also give is the cookbook. And
Oh
for the
yeah.
cookbooks, I know that's an area that when I work, I do a lot of in-home.
Hmm.
And we get to the cookbooks and they're like, oh, well, I think that I would totally make this recipe or I would make this recipe. And I'm kind of like, oh, okay, really? So can you tell us the difference? Because obviously with the shoes, I love that, like changing the story around it so you can use it. But if we have this like, and I know for you it was kind of like the Martha Stewart, but to have like this, we have these like really kind of complex like cookbooks. This isn't like
Yes.
get dinner on the table in 15-minute cookbook. This is the
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
super complex. And we're like, well, maybe I might make one of those recipes sometime. How did
That's
you
right.
approach that identity clutter a little bit differently to be able to actually be like, yeah, I'm letting this go?
With that one, and I'll speak to the story for those who haven't read the book. I grew up, I was born in 88. I grew up, my mom was like, maybe with the exception of the cooking, but like home decor, sewing, everything. She was like, just Martha Stewart was on TV. She was on our, coffee table. And I was like, speaking to the cultural piece of the stuff story and the historical, right? My mom's aspiring to be this woman. Wow, she looks pretty perfect. Look how happy she is making souffles and hosting 18 people and like whipping up like duck confit, like with a in the blink of an eye. And I'm like, well, I guess this is what I should do too, or what I should strive for. And I never really hosted as I got older. Kids came into the picture. And, I think in those moments of motherhood, when we're missing years before kids, like that identity, and I don't think people talk about that enough. I think in those moments what I would typically reach for was shopping, or you're scrolling on Instagram, and I was hit with like this aspirational woman who was a chef in the kitchen, had like 8 kids, and they all wore matching outfits, and they like baked pies together, and I was like, that's what I want to be. So that exploited, not maliciously, it exploited that void in me. And I was like, oh, she has a hosting cookbook. I want to host one day. I'll buy it. So, as we all know how the story ends, that cookbook sat on my counter for years. And then it went into a little cupboard next to me. So it wasn't like stressing me out like a lot of other clutter. It's not something I saw every day, but at the end of the day, it reminded me in that reflection piece and getting curious piece, like, why am I struggling to let this go? It was because like I thought in order to be like the best mom and the best wife, and it brings tears to my eyes. This is how raw it felt. Like I should be that. And I'm not living up to that. And part of that is my season in life. And I could have said, oh, it's just my season. Maybe when the kids are older. And sometimes, fine, sure, keep it until the kids are older. But I really had to acknowledge deep in my heart that, like, I am not that person. I don't want to even do those things. This is just a dream that was like put into my head from my stuff story. So again, I was like, number one, I'm great. My kids don't need me to make duck or like host 20 people to be a great mom. So it's like, we need to acknowledge that I am a great mom as I am now. And when you acknowledge that and rewire that and believe it, even if you kind of have to fake it till you make it, all of a sudden that cookbook I couldn't part with, and that made me feel like a failure in some sense for a long time. I was like, I'm ready to let this go. And there's someone out there who's going to be so thrilled to see this at the, Goodwill or wherever, the charity. And she is that person who really is and has the capacity and wants to be this amazing aspirational chef. Good
Yeah.
for her. And it felt so freeing. Again, not only releasing the item, but releasing the belief tied to it.
Yeah, and that's why identity clutter is like the hardest kind, but then also, like you said, the freedom that you
Oh,
feel when you release it is just like so important. And you were
yeah.
mentioning before about like the clutter kind of bullying us, and
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. Like if it's bullying you or mocking you, but sometimes it's almost this kind of like whispering, because it
Yeah.
might be like behind the cabinet and you don't see
Yeah.
it that often. But I have just one quick example of somebody because I wrote an article about aspirational clutter, which is like an aspect of
Yes.
identity clutter. And he wrote to me and he said that he had been a Boy Scout and he had kept his Boy Scout uniform for years and years and years, and it had just been like in his basement, you know? And he finally took a look at it and he let it go. He had suffered abuse as a child in the Boy Scouts. And I mean, he has was holding on to it because he felt like he should in case his kids might want to do Boy Scouts or something, okay? But he had suffered this trauma around the stuff, but he didn't recognize like the emotional weight of the
Yes.
thing because you're holding on to it just because you think you quote unquote should. Now, obviously, that's a very very extreme example, and I was very touched that he shared that with me. But the point being, if you have something you're holding on to because you think, well, people just keep this. Like I kept my yearbook for a long time, but then I let it go because it wasn't the happiest time of my life in high school. You have to recognize some of these things. They may not be shouting at you, they
Yeah.
may be whispering to you, but it's still impacting how you feel about yourself and
Yeah.
this and what you tell yourself about your value
Yes.
and who you are and everything. So I just wanted to mention that because, yeah, it may not be the running shoes shouting. It may be the cookbook whispering. They're
That's
both
right.
the kind, things that we have to deal with.
Comes in all shapes, sizes, and forms. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I want to kind of shift to, well, resets. And the reason is I always talk about resets just kind of like as part of I don't know, sometimes I switch it up in my group. Like sometimes we'll do a decluttering challenge and sometimes we do a reset challenge because they're kind of like similar but different. And I would love it because I had never thought about resets being like the gateway sort of to decluttering, or I forget. Oh yeah, the doorway to decluttering, you say. And I
Yeah.
was wondering if you talk about, if we're kind of understanding, okay, yes, I think I might start with some of that, some of that surface clutter, some of that initial stuff that's pretty easy. How do resets kind of like factor in to all of that?
Yeah. So I guess to tee up the answer to that,
Yeah.
what I believe is that most decluttering advice shames normal life and normal expected mess. And the goal goes from like, hey, I'm overwhelmed, I'm buried in clutter, I'm burdened. And the pendulum swings so far the other way to this idyllic Pinterest, Instagram, like, here's what we're after, right? And in that gap, any mess, any clutter of any kind, it's like, again, the meaning we're assigning to it. And typically, most women I work with is I stink at this, I'm a failure, I'm not good at XYZ, whatever that is. So I very quickly realized I need to, in order to help women, differentiate between these two things, clutter and what I now call expected mess. Clutter is the stuff that is draining us, right? The four types we talked about: broken toys, paper piles, all the things, right? This is stuff that's taking up space in our homes, hearts, minds. Expected mess is evidence of life being lived. And truly, as annoying as it can be, it's not the true enemy. And if you get really curious and sometimes even remind yourself, this is a blessing. The dirty dishes on the counter are a reminder of this great opportunity I just had to have a family dinner, with my kids and laugh over what happened at school today. All these things. Like my living room you see behind me, Emily, typically gets on the weekends turned into a fort. And I don't love that. I would like it to just stay as it is, really just like tidy and nice. So I have to remind myself, okay, Katy, this isn't clutter. Like it's kind of like telling our brains to settle down. This is expected mess. It can be solved really quickly with a reset, which we'll talk about in a second. And what a beautiful thing. This is what happens. And this isn't what we're sold, right? And so the resets I decided were the doorway to decluttering because I have to meet people where they are. It's kind of like going to a gym and walking in one day and saying, I'm going to like bench press 50 pounds when I've never even lifted a bar. Right. Maybe I'm really eager. Maybe I saw someone on Instagram like doing that and I was like, oh, I can do that too. And yes, declutter. But resets teach us how to manage that expected mess and keep it to a minimum, keep that from overwhelming us. And when we get that more in control, that does so many good things. It makes us believe I can do this. There is hope. And now I can tackle the deeper clutter, right? Or now I can start doing clutter audits and add those into the resets. And they build the muscle before we do the need for bigger work, so to speak. So a reset, for your followers who maybe aren't familiar with those, it is a simple routine where you spend a few minutes setting these different spaces back into your home to their baseline tidiness. It's not necessarily declutter focus. It's just about expected mess maintenance. And the good news is everyone probably does this to some extent, like after a meal, right? We wipe down the counters, we put the dirty dishes, maybe not in the dishwasher, maybe in the sink, but you know what I'm saying? Like we put the ketchup bottle back into the fridge, stuff like that. That is a reset. So it's really about applying that same philosophy to these other areas of your home, depending on the hub and how busy they are, how many people are in your home. Mm-hmm. You can do these anywhere from, 3 times a day in a busy spot like a kitchen, and if you're home all day, to maybe once a week, like in other areas, like my nightstand, I reset, and my bathroom, I reset once a week, stuff like that. So when I started doing them, they did all the things we talked about, and it just gave me such a vote of confidence to be able to be like, okay, what next? And then I started adding, decluttering really quickly into that. I call them clutter audits.
Yeah, I love just having that initial filter of like looking and seeing whether something is that expected mess or clutter. You'll appreciate this being a boy mom times two. My living room is 50% Lego cities. Okay.
Yes.
So, and I have had to accept the fact that my kids don't have like toys all over their rooms, right? Mm-hmm. So the toys have to be somewhere because they're children. Okay.
That's right.
So I just, half of our floor is Lego cities, but there is a reset expected with those, with like the extra pieces and whatever. And yeah, anytime my boys are like, "We're gonna get all the couch pillows," I'm like, "Okay," because it's pillow fort time, But then the reset, and that I love about your. And I won't get it too much into this because I want people to actually read the book, but the 25, concept where it's like you might be doing something for 20 minutes, but then you always are like having that reset time included in it, because the reset can be short. It can be, whatever you have the time to do, but just being able to do that and to include your family members in it, which is what I want to end on, which is this, everyone asks me anytime I go anywhere, how do you get family members on board? How do I get my kids on board? How do I get my husband on board? How do I get, And so what I love in the book, you talk about like the design for follow through as far as like how we actually have our spaces and kind of that environmental design. I just love that concept. And a guest gave an example of the family just could not seem to get the clothes like in the hamper. It was always on top of the lid. And so then she's like, well, the lid is the friction. So we're just going to have an open basket. And miraculously, what do you know? Everyone can get it into the basket. But can you give some other examples of sort of like what that design for follow through is and how we can think about that when we are trying to get our family members on board?
First of all, I love that example, right? So really it's about identifying these different pain points in our house, like your client did, like, oh, no matter what I do, my kids and husband don't put their stuff in the hamper. So lid is absolutely friction. It is one more step. On paper, you're like, just open the lid. But here's the thing. I'm the same. We're all wired. Like, like we try to bypass like anything that's going to like take our time in the moment. And speaking to that, I want to share another example I did years ago is same thing. I had a hamper in my room, in our bedroom. My husband either threw his clothes on the floor in the bathroom or on top of the lid or on the floor next to it. And so I said, I actually decluttered the hamper, and now we put our dirty clothes directly into the washing machine. Now that works for our family because of our laundry system, but I want to offer that, right? Sometimes we think, oh gosh, if I can only get them to be more organized, or if I only could get them to care, if I could only get them to notice these things. And I get it. It is really frustrating. So what I did, instead of nagging, prodding, slamming the kitchen cabinets and begging my husband to get rid of his clutter, I said, what if I just looked at my home environment and started there? And this is when we meet them, where instead of changing the person and trying to like force them into a bucket, right? It's the concept of changing the environment to make the right behavior, the behavior we want them to do, the easiest behavior, the most likely to follow through. I'm a big fan of James Clear. Knowing you, I'm sure you are too, in Atomic Habits. I think it was that book where he said, environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. And it is so true. So putting it into practice, can look like a lot of different ways. I'll share a story. I worked with a woman once who, similar to me, she was always nagging her husband, like, come on, you've got too many clothes. Like he had all these clothes from high school and stuff he never wore and sweatshirts and all the things, right? It's always easier to identify other people's clutter, by the way, isn't it? It's like, oh, it's not, I'm not the problem. It's you. She asked him multiple times, just declutter, please. I'll help you. She did all the things. And so when we started working together, we started with, let's just design for follow through. So how we did that was we put a donation station, which was just a simple Amazon box she had on hand already. We didn't shop for anything. And we put it next to his dresser. She had really no big conversation. She just said, oh, hey, honey, I added a donation station next to your dresser. So if you ever find anything you don't need or want to get rid of, feel free to add it in there. And I think it was like by the end of the night, like at the end of the day, like she walked up and it was full. And she was like, are you kidding me? I spent years nagging this guy. That's all I had to do. She thought he was resisting, right? And that can cause a lot of resentment and friction in a relationship. I totally have experienced that too. And that is really designed for follow through and action. She changed the environment. She started with the environment. So onboarding your family, I know it's like the $1 million question. So start by observing where the friction, the pain points you have and where things are landing, where do backpacks get dropped, do the shoes pile up, and designing your systems around the actual behavior, not necessarily your ideal behavior. So place a hook where they drop a bag. A lot of times it's very simple, like there is no home, or the issue is like, well, I already have a hook for that, but it's overflowing with 18 other coats. They can't fit another thing on. So then your solution goes, oh, I just need to declutter so they can access that hook more easily. And then lo and behold, they're much more likely to start doing it. Now, the second thing is maybe you design for follow through. You add the hooks, you add the bins, you add the donation stations for clutter. You declutter so it's easily accessible. And then we can go to the reality that some old habits die hard, right? That's just the reality. We're human. And then you could say something like, hey, I noticed this is still landing here. Can we try using this new spot instead? Enough to kind of redirect the autopilot. And I think when you too understand that because this is human behavior, we depersonalize it, right? It very much, I used to feel this, and maybe you have too, where it's like, it's me versus my family. I'm the only one that cares. I'm the only one. Gosh, I did not like my family when I used to feel that way. And when I depersonalized it, speaking to decluttering that mental weight and being like, oh, girl, we are on the same team. They're just living on autopilot. And this autopilot maybe isn't the one I want them on. So just starting with your environment there. And then I will say more often than not, it is going to help solve it immediately or lead you down the path, in a much faster way to onboard them, where you are really working as a team. And as a mom, that is so invaluable to me.
Yeah, a lot of times it's just they're not even noticing. Like they just don't even notice. I
Yes.
mean, I've told my kids, okay, well, the backpacks, I see they're on the floor. What do we talk about? Oh, sorry, mom. And my my youngest is like, I'm sorry, mom. It's just a habit. Like,
Yes, they
and I
know.
mean, he understands it. He knows. So then it's just like, okay, well, that's fine. Well, let's see. And then if for some reason it keeps being a problem, maybe
Mhm.
we'll have a different system, and it may
That's right.
not be the Pinterest perfect system, but it's the system that's actually
Yes.
going to get the stuff off the floor, which is
Amen.
what we actually need.
That's right.
So, oh, this was so fun. I knew it was going to be fun, but it was so fun. So I'm so glad you came on the show. Can you please
Thank
let
you.
people know we're going to have a lot of information in the show notes, y'all. So
Yeah.
make sure you check the show notes. But can you let them know where they can pre-order the book and just anything that you want to share?
Yeah, you can pre-order the book now. It's called Making Home Your Happy Place and the real life guide to declutter without the overwhelm, like Emily shared. And everything we talked about today was really just the tip of the iceberg. In the book, I walk you through step by step the process to identify your stuff story. We go into specific strategies for the 4 clutter types. And what I love, I think, most about this book is it's designed to be a companion that you come back to time and time again, because that's the reality. Like this journey, it's a journey. I'm still on it. And as you work through different areas of your home, different seasons of life, and are trying to continue to simplify. That's really my goal, that you pick it up, you dog ear it, not just read it once and donate it. So you can grab that anywhere you buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. We'll have a link for you in the show notes, like Emily shared. And if you want more resources, of course, come check out the show, The Maximized Minimalist. That's my podcast, and my website's katyjoywells.com for free resources and all the ways to work with me.
Yay. Okay. Well, I will link everything in the show notes. Thank you so much, Katy. It was so wonderful chatting with you today.
Thanks, Emily. This was such a gift. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Mama. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, could you please share this episode with another mom who is feeling overwhelmed? Also, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a 5-star written review wherever you listen to your podcast. Finally, if you would like more support, come on over to our free Facebook group, tinyurl.com/moms overcoming overwhelm. Can't wait to connect with you soon.